Good day. My name is Jason Casada of Enlight Software, and welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar entitled Improving Healthcare Data Center Efficiency and Compliance. We will be talking about how healthcare organizations are using Data Center Service Management, DCSM software to improve their data center operations. If you have any questions, please submit them via the chat box on your screen, and we will answer them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please note that the webinar will be recorded and be made available to you within 48 hours. Okay, let's get this show on the road. I'd like to introduce to you Mark Gatos, CMO of Enlight Software. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Jason. So everybody on the webinar, I want to thank you for the time you're going to be spending with us today. I appreciate you joining us. We tend to run a pretty fast webinar here at Enlight. Historically, I find a lot of webinars move pretty slow, and so most people will appreciate you keeping the pace pretty fast. So our goal is to basically keep this webinar within the 30-minute time frame, including presentation and Q&A. And as Jason just said, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them, and we will try to get to all of them at the end. So again, if you have any questions, we urge you to ask them because it will make the end of this presentation so much more enjoyable if there are actually questions. So the agenda today, I'm going to do a quick introduction to Enlight for those of you that are not familiar with Enlight. We'll talk about sort of the challenges in the data center, and we'll talk about the evolution of what we call data center service management. And for those of you that are familiar with data center infrastructure management, DCIM, this is sort of the evolution of DCIM. It sort of goes to the next level, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we have a couple of specific case studies we're going to be talking about of healthcare companies who are using data center service management to really improve the efficiency and drive down the costs in their data centers. And then we'll talk about things to consider if you're thinking about doing data center service management. You know, what should you be considering as you sort of are at the beginning of that process? And so again, and then at the end, we'll also open it up to questions. So feel free again to submit those questions. That's my pretty bald face in the upper right, and we will move on to the first slide. So a little bit about Enlight. We were one of the first companies doing what is called data center infrastructure management. We are the leading provider of software solutions that help companies really automate the management of their data centers. We coined the phrase DCIM over 10 years ago. The company's been in business over 11 years, and now we're sort of expanding our capabilities and functionality to provide what is called data center service management. We'll talk about a little bit about that in a couple slides. Here's a partial list of the companies who use us. As you can see, they come from a wide set of industries. But what they all have in common, what all these companies have in common, and they range from relatively small to behemoth, but what they all have in common is they use Enlight to really automate the management of their data centers, to sort of find a way to use software to help them manage the day-to-day management of their data centers, whether it's one data center or in one case for one of our customers, they have 45 data centers worldwide that they manage from one instance of Enlight. So again, all these companies, just a partial list of our customers, use Enlight to really automate the management of the data centers. And Enlight is the market leader. The most recent Magic Quadrant came out about less than a month ago. The latest DCIM Gartner Magic Quadrant came out last month, and we're one of 3 leading companies in the leadership quadrant. We're the only dedicated software company. The other 2 are hardware vendors. But we estimate, based on figures we've seen from Gartner, that of those companies that are using DCIM to manage their data centers, we have about a quarter of the market worldwide. And Gartner has a separate report they call the Critical Capabilities, which came out last year. I think it's going to be updated in January, that ranked the specific products of vendors, and Enlight was ranked the highest for enterprise and mid-market companies. So we have the most robust product for these types of use cases for large enterprises and mid-sized companies. And as I mentioned, and you could see on the earlier slide, we have some of the largest and most sophisticated data center deployments in the world. Extremely highly scalable product. We can support up to 150,000 racks, which Most companies are not that large. We also support on-premise, and we also support in the cloud. So if you want to have a SaaS version of nLight to manage your data center, we support that as well as we support premise. We're fanatical about customer support because this is all we do. This is the one business we focus on. It's important our customers are successful. We have no shelfware. Customers don't buy nLight and then don't deploy it. We have 100% use of our software. We have a 99% customer retention. We are fanatical about making sure our customers are successful. It doesn't mean we don't have issues, you bet. As a software company, there are always going to be issues, but we want to make sure we take care of them because all of our customers are critical to us. So now if we sort of back up and if you sort of think about the average data center, for those that don't work in the data center, they think, oh, there are just some servers in there and nothing really changes and there are cobwebs growing in the data center. But in actuality, for those of us that have worked in a data center, we know there's a lot more going on at any given time. There are a lot of people that have to be coordinated. There are a variety of resources. There are assets. There are company policies you have to follow. There's cabling issues, power issues. There's just a lot of moving parts. And at any given time, different parts of a data center, and you might have multiple data centers and data rooms, at any given time there can be different things happening in different parts of the data center. You could be doing tech refresh in one part of the data center while doing decommission in another. You could be doing a consolidation. You could be doing a migration. You might have bought another company and been integrating their data center into your data center. Data centers tend to be very complex with a lot of moving parts, right? And so that ends up being a challenge for a lot of organizations to manage. And typically and you'd be surprised at how large, you can find some very large data centers that are using very manual processes to manage their data centers. The number one solution we find companies are using, or really a Band-Aid they're using, is typically when they engage with nLight, is they're using spreadsheets and they're using Visio and they're using AutoCAD to try and manage their data center. And in some cases, they're literally just writing it down on paper, and there's a lot of tribal knowledge in the heads of the people who are working in the data center. And as a result, data center personnel are constantly making changes, right? They're being asked to put in new servers, they're bringing in switches, they're cabling, they're doing all sorts of things which may not be captured inside a spreadsheet. And as a result, it introduces changes that aren't necessarily being captured in a centralized fashion. Assets can be decommissioned and people don't know about it. There are changes occurring in power and space and utilization that, again, if they're put into spreadsheets, aren't necessarily being centralized and being updated on a regular basis. And of course, this information, when it's in spreadsheets, doesn't get synchronized into ITSM systems or into asset systems or into ERP systems or into any type of systems that are dependent on the data center. And so, and in the last point, as a result of all of this, often we're finding the companies we talk to are failing audits, where auditors will come in and say, okay, tell us where your assets are. They generate a report off the spreadsheet, and then all of a sudden they find that the information's not accurate. And the last thing you want to do is give an auditor incorrect information right at the beginning, because they're like ferrets. The moment they smell there's something wrong, they jump in even further to find out what's going on. So a lot of times all this movement that's being captured manually isn't being captured. Changes are occurring that are outside the spreadsheets. The information gets out of sync, and as a result, you're failing audits and you're not updating the systems that are dependent on the data system, on the data center. And again, this is the sort of taking it further. The systems that are dependent on the data center don't have an accurate representation of the assets and the processes that are going on. So at the simplest level, you're not catching the assets, but again, you're also not getting a true idea of what activities are occurring in the data center and who is working on what and how long it's taking. And so all of this information is not being represented up in ITSM systems or in other systems such as ERP or asset management systems, or systems that are being used to maintain maintenance contracts and warranties and so forth. So it's difficult to perform accurate planning because the data is often out of sync. Assets are not where they're supposed to be. Assets might have been decommissioned that potentially are still drawing in energy. So people have decommissioned them, the virtuals have gone somewhere else, but those assets can continue to run and absorb energy. Often these are referred to as zombie servers, right? And then if you're trying to keep up with the tech refresh process, this becomes insanely difficult to do in a manual method, right? If you're trying to implement the latest servers to reduce your costs, to increase your compute capacity, this becomes a huge challenge, right? And again, as I mentioned before, audits fail when you don't have accurate information in the system. And I think the quote here gives a great example of a company that had IBM come in and do an audit, and they found that more than 50% of the data was inaccurate. Assets were either not where they were supposed to be, or they were not what they said they were. So again, not a great way to create confidence in your auditors. Overall, this is all about whether you're measuring assets or you're measuring the personnel who are performing activities in the data center. The ultimate goal is to deliver a service, right? That's really what you're trying to do, is deliver a top-notch service that is providing compute and storage capacity to the applications the enterprise runs. So if we take a look at this next slide, the Gartner survey talks about the drivers for data center infrastructure management. This was a survey they did during the summer, and the results came out just this last September. And as you can see, the number one driver at the top is to facilitate capacity planning. The second, which also got the most number one response, is to provide a common platform for IT and facilities. And the third is to provide a more comprehensive visualization of the data center. So these are sort of the main drivers that are driving folks to do DSIM and really get their arms around this process rather than using spreadsheets and Visio drawings and AutoCAD. This is why companies really look at performing data center infrastructure management. So there's, as I said before, for somebody that's outside the data center, it seems like a very simple world. But when you get into it, there are a lot of different processes that get supported inside the data center. And Nlyte provides a complete coverage across the entire life cycle of the data center, from workflow to the goods receiving process. We have a very large tech company who literally assets begin their life in their organization with Nlyte. They come to the back dock. Nlyte scans them and then determines optimally where they go based on the space requirements, the energy requirements, and individuals are then given a punch list of what they need to do to put those assets in play. And so I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but you can see there are a lot of different processes that the Nlyte software supports, because in the end it is about delivering a service. That service is compute capacity, right? Compute and storage capacity. And we were just talking to a company recently that was being asked, well, how much does it cost for us to deliver compute capacity? Because I know I can go to Amazon AWS and get compute capacity there for X amount of dollars per hour per instance. And so they were being asked, well, how much does it cost us? And so a lot of organizations are starting to have to figure out more, what does it cost to deliver that service? And so being able to support the entire life cycle, you get a better idea of how much each of those stages of the life cycle of the assets within the data center, how much they cost to really provide to the business. And so this is where the DSIM market is evolving. Many of you on the call are probably familiar with data center infrastructure management. It's been around, like I said, for over a decade. Nlyte was the first company with a sort of modern DSIM architecture. But it's sort of evolving, and it's evolving into what we call data center service management rather than just data center infrastructure. So what do we mean by that? Well, what we're finding is companies are starting to go beyond just managing their infrastructure. And if you think about it, DSIM, managing your infrastructure, is the foundation of data center service management. What most companies do is they begin with, okay, we want to start programmatically in an automated way using software to manage the infrastructure within our data center, the physical stuff, right? The cabling, the power, the assets, the racks, the space, everything that's going on physically within the data center, they want to manage using DSIM. But then what we find is they want to do these additional items, which is part of the service management story. They want to start monitoring, to implement workflow in order to help sort of manage and guide personnel to perform tasks in a consistent fashion. So there are multiple benefits of doing this, right, of implementing workflow within the data center. So when you need to make changes, you actually put it into the workflow, and it can guide personnel to specifically what tasks they need to do at what specific locations, right? Put in the asset, cable it up to power, cable it up to networking. That way you can create consistent policy procedures and follow specific policies that the organization has to ensure things are done in a consistent fashion. And then the third part of data center service management is really managing the connections into other systems. The data center is not an island. It's actually an important part of the overall compute capacity and the overall application strategy of an organization. And so you want to tie your data center into other systems, such as ITSM systems. You want to tie into facility. You might want to tie into RFID systems. So data center service management is managing those connections. You don't want to have to create specific one-off integrations for every single integration you do. And so Nlyte provides a robust communication framework as part of our architecture that allows the system to manage these connections, and you go and then can just administer them rather than having to write hard-coded integrations into these systems. And so that's a big, sort of the third pillar of data center service management, is integrating into these systems that are dependent on the data center. So as we like to say, it's not about just managing infrastructure, it's about delivering a service. When you really back up, that's what you're interested in. You want to deliver your SLAs in a cost-effective fashion. And so from a healthcare perspective, we're going to get into a couple case studies here. This is the overall story. Is companies usually want to sort of start with managing their infrastructure. That's usually where they start. But the plan usually is to go larger. They want to actually deliver a service in a repeatable fashion, hit their SLAs in the most cost-effective fashion possible. And so this is where things are starting to evolve, is that companies are going from DSIM to a broader story, to data center service management, where they're not only managing infrastructure, but they're getting visibility and helping their personnel do things more efficiently, and they're tying into other systems so that anyone who's dependent on the data center, whether it's finance, whether it's IT operations, whether it's facilities, anyone who's dependent on the data center has complete visibility up to the minute information on changes that are going on in the data center, whether that's updating a CMDB, whether that's updating a service management system, whether that's updating change management, whether it's updating asset management. The systems that are dependent on the data center need to have the most current information. And this is overall part of the data center service management story. And so specifically to healthcare, right, there's challenges that are very focused on the world of healthcare. And so we have two case studies here. One, we've had to anonymize because the client didn't want us to mention them by name. They were fine with us sharing the information. But this is a large managed healthcare company here in North America. They have 3 large data centers, approximately 2,000 racks. And their challenge was they needed to move from a manual approach. They were using spreadsheets, but they didn't have the ability to plan and view detailed information on assets, the dependencies of those assets, the power requirements, the connections. They wanted one pane one screen that they could go to and see everything that's happening inside their data centers. So they were using, as I said, manual systems. They had no workflow to ensure consistency or how to measure the people who are performing different tasks in the data center. And none of this was integrated with their IT systems. They're a big user of HP's ITSM systems, and they had no ability really to integrate this information in. They were manually populating their UCMDB. So because of this, they were unable to report accurately on capacity needs. They lacked consistency in how tasks were being performed. They didn't really have transparency on how much time tasks were taking. And they had really, as I mentioned before, they weren't integrating this information into other systems. And they implemented Nlyte to really help manage the ongoing moves, adds, and changes that were happening in the organization. And now they have better control of the assets. They've improved their planning on all fronts, whether it's capacity planning, whether it's migrations or consolidations. They have the ability to visualize all stages of assets from a lifecycle perspective, and they've integrated into HP UCMDB. We provide out-of-the-box connectors to a variety of the ITSM providers. They used our connector to connect into HP UCMDB, so now that any changes on the data center floor of assets are reflected in the UCMDB. And lastly, they're currently in the process of implementing workflow to increase the efficiency of the personnel. So again, some companies, those companies that are moving towards data center service management always start with infrastructure management. Sometimes they'll integrate to their ITSM systems first and then go to workflow, and sometimes they'll start with workflow and then integrate into the ITSM system. So it varies, but they always start with managing the infrastructure with DSIM. So the second case study here, which we actually have up on our website, is the Sutter Healthcare case study. For those that are not familiar with Sutter Healthcare, it's a nonprofit health system. Approximately last year in 2014, they did $10.2 billion in revenue. They have 50,000 doctors, caregivers, and staff. Mainly, they do business in Northern California. I actually go there myself, but that's a side note. So for those that care on the call, I'm sure there are dozens who are just waiting to hear that. So their need was the ability to manage the 6 different data centers they have in a more efficient fashion. And they wanted to be able to support more proactive power and cooling management and get a better understanding of network capacity and network connectivity and capacity at any given time. They really need to see how assets were dependent on one another and how they were interconnected. And so before they implemented Nlyte, they were using spreadsheets and a variety of different access databases to manage the assets. And so they were managing these 6 data centers manually. They really didn't have any ability to perform what-if analysis. If they did, it was a very sort of painful process to do so. And they lacked power, cooling, networking, capacity information on a timely fashion. And so as a result, they lacked integration into ITSM. There was a disconnect between the physical and the logical layers, so they couldn't get an idea of how one related to the other. They had inaccurate information on the inventories there, and a lot of this information was housed in sort of tribal knowledge within individuals, so they needed this disparate information to be consolidated. They lacked an understanding of how these assets were interconnected. I mentioned that before, which is critical for them, because in the end, they want 100% uptime. That is their goal, is they really have the desire, and the company has a huge focus on providing the highest level of service possible. And so for them, that means reaching a 99.99% uptime. And so by implementing Nlyte, they improve the control and the visibility across these 6 data centers. They have the ability to perform what-if scenarios around power, around capacity, around consolidations, around migration, because the system is all automated and it's all managed through software. They can perform these what-if scenarios more easily. They have better control of their assets, their power, their networking, their capacity. They integrated Nlyte into they use BMC, and the BMC BMC CMDB, so that information inside Nlyte is any changes that are occurring in the data center are automatically reflected up into the CMDB. And overall, they've improved the control and the uptime of the data centers by making sure that they're using software and using sort of an automated fashion to manage their data centers. And again, this particular case study is up on our website if anybody is interested. So we find when companies are often see this as very daunting, they think, well, we're using spreadsheets today. How could we possibly sort of begin to do this? It seems very daunting to do so, but every company has to start somewhere. And so when considering implementing data center service management, here are the things you should really think about. First off, it's a staged process. You're not going to just leap from day one to day two, have an entire solution that you're managing all your infrastructure. You've got workflow, you're tied into all your systems. You go in stages. And so we recommend to most companies you start with where's the information you have, right? You start with where is your data, and we always find any company any customer we have has data somewhere. They have spreadsheets, they've got Visio drawings, they might have a competing product of Nlyte's that's not functioning. We have tools that will migrate this information over, and you always sort of start with asset information. That is sort of the fundamentals, and then you begin to add things like interconnectivity and power. So the key is to start with stages. We start with where your data is, but we do this all the time. We make customers successful because we have the tools to migrate the data over into our system. And then you have to start thinking what people need to be involved. And it isn't just data center people, it isn't just IT or facilities, but it's people who are dependent on the data center. It could be finance, it could be IT operations, it could be DevOps. Anyone who's dependent on the data center may have input, and you want to get that input on the front end as you begin to plan how you're going to roll out data center service management. Then you begin to figure out what systems you want to tie in, which are critical, which will get the greatest value and ROI by integrating into them. And that really ties into who needs the data. We find finance often is a benefactor of implementing data center service management because now they can gain an understanding of what systems are where, and they can reconcile for perhaps warranties or service contracts that are being applied against specific assets. So it's important to understand who needs the data and who needs to be involved so that they have a buy-in to the whole process. So when you're in the front end, these are sort of the things to consider, which are sort of the three elements of data center service management: your infrastructure, your people, processes, workflows, and the systems you want to tie into, and then getting everyone to buy into them. So we've gotten a few questions here, so I want to make sure we can get to the questions. I leave you with this. If you happen to be at either of the Gartner Data Center Conference events that are coming up at the beginning of December, I think one starts November 30th, either in London or Las Vegas, please drop by our booth. We'd love to chat with you, even if you just want to come meet the folks at Nlyte. Come on over. We're very friendly. We're not a hard sale company. So feel free to drop by. And as I mentioned before, the Sutter Health case study is up on our website under resources. You can go and view it and see a little more detail on the slide that I presented here. There's more information up in the case study. So at this point, we don't have too much time left, but I want to open it up for questions.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate the interesting insight into data center service management. We do have a couple of questions. The first question is, are you giving away any awesome swag at the shows?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, everybody always is interested in swag. Yes, we are going to be giving away swag at both the London and Vegas events. Thank you for that question. We'll be giving away Boogie Bots and a variety of other different types of swag. So another reason to come drop by and say hi to the Nlyte folks.
Another question in from the audience. Do you integrate with ServiceNow?
I guess during the presentation, we talked about HP, we talked about BMC. We actually have pre-built connectors with over 50 different systems, some of them facility systems, RFID systems, but we also support ServiceNow. To answer the specific question, we support the three major ITSM vendors, BMC, HP, and ServiceNow. Additionally, we have connectors into virtualization systems. As I said, we have over 50 pre-built connectors, and we have customers today that are integrated into ServiceNow, BMC, HP, to list the 3 main ITSM vendors.
Okay, well, another question from the audience. So we are small compared to the customers listed in the slide you produced. How big does a data center need to be?
It's a good question. We have companies, I mentioned one company that has 45 data centers that we're managing, something in the neighborhood of 30 to 35,000 racks. Our smallest customer actually manages 20 racks. We tend to find the sweet spot of where companies begin is probably about 100 racks is where it begins to make financial sense. And it also depends on how a lot of companies, the company that implemented that only has 20 racks, they've got huge HIPAA compliance issues. And so they want to make sure everything is tracked and there's an audit trail for everything being done, not in a spreadsheet, but an audit trail that's actually in a system, and we can generate those reports. So again, it depends on the requirements. We find if you have 100 racks or more, that's where it tends to make a lot of sense.
Great. And last question from the audience. So we've got a lot of data all over the place. Where do we even start?
Well, I sort of hit on that earlier. Thanks for the question. Inevitably, every customer we have had data somewhere. It isn't that people aren't recording this information. They're just recording it in a variety of disparate systems. We have built tools over the last decade that help us migrate folks off of some of the failing DSIM providers. We're currently deploying a customer who tried for 2 years to deploy another DSIM solution, and we have tools that migrate them into our system. We have tools to migrate spreadsheets. We can take flat files. We have a lot of tools that allow you to pull that information. Ultimately, you've got to know where that information is. That we can't be sleuths and go find it. Some of it we can discover, but a lot of it we need you to tell us where it is. But then our team does a great job of sort of pulling it over, integrating it in, and making sure that we get that sort of core, that's the foundation, up and running. And then from there, you begin to update all the information in the system, and you stop using spreadsheets, obviously, or the data will get out of sync again. So, all right, I think we're over time, actually. I think we're a few minutes over. So if we have any other questions, we will get to anybody who asked any other questions. Thank you for the questions you folks did ask. Again, if you happen to be at the Gartner Data Center conferences, either in London or Las Vegas, please feel free to drop by and say hello. And that brings us to the end of this webinar. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out at info@nlight.com, or you can email me at mark.gatos@nlight.com, and I'm on the website if anybody wants to see how that's spelled. Thank you, everyone, for the time you spent. Have a great day and have a great Thanksgiving.